Can you feel it? 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 Can you feel? Can you feel it? 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 Can you feel? Can you feel it?
Hello, friends. Welcome to Forsa, the podcast that dives in to explore the nature and experience of being alive. I'm your host, Tracy Breathnach, performance artist, writer, researcher, mother, lover, all-round deep diver into embodied experience. What does it feel like to be alive? How can I describe it and communicate it? How can we learn from each other's experiences of aliveness? In the series, I talk with a wide variety of guests, artists, activists, educators, spiritual teachers, writers, guides, shamans, to find out more about their experiences of the force, life force, energy of life, elixir of life, source, whatever we might call it. I hope it brings something new to your experience of being alive.
Can you feel it? 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 Can you feel it?
My guest in this episode is Rabab Ghazoul. Rabab is a socially engaged visual artist whose work explores points of contact between systems of power and individual agency, voices that are yet to speak, spaces of in-betweenness, and the body politic. This emerges as video, installation, text, as performance or public realm interventions and encounters, and occasionally as song, sometimes print. Rabab was born and raised in Iraq for the first 10 years and has lived in Wales since 1993. In 2016, she set up Gentle Radical to address some of the more uncomfortable conditions and realities she had sometimes faced as an artist working with institutions or organizations in general, whose agendas were so often informed by outcomes over process, by delivery over inquiry. Gentle Radical is a space where artists and communities can talk about decolonialism and power, where we are all invited to curate, collaborate, challenge, push, create change, and to come together. So thank you, Rabab, for joining me today. And I notice in my body, just as I'm coming to speaking, I feel really warm in my belly. And this is a sensation that if I were to do in my thinking, I could really associate with you and how I first met you, which was in Bridgend, when you came to do the empty shop, and you set up a space really for the community and artists to come together. And it was really my first experience of a creative space in Bridgend that felt truly nourishing and both, I suppose, in terms of the way you put those events together, and there was often food or opportunities to chat around the events, but also in actually it was really meeting my need for connection with other humans that was felt really honest and had a lot of integrity. So I'm feeling that now as we kind of come towards this, and perhaps the first question I'd like to maybe open with is, I'm thinking about life force and energy of life, and as an artist, maybe if you could talk a bit about your experience of creating art with communities or in communities with people, and how you experience the art making or the art event or the process, and how enlivening it might be or awakening in terms of the energy that is created through that or from that.
Oh, wow. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. And it's so nice to hear that about any project, but I think it was a really, that Bridgend project, that residency was a really special, just a really special project for me. I felt like I made so many quite profound connections. And it was, I suppose, the first time we met. And it's funny you described that warm feeling in your belly, because I think the feeling I think of when I think of you is just this real warmth and this openness, just real openness. And it's good to reconnect to that. So, gosh, it's really interesting to think about energy and life force in relation to work, because I'm not sure if I've ever quite come at it in that way. It's really good to ponder it in a way. I suppose one aspect of it for me, especially within social practice contexts, is this word you used earlier, which is like a nourishing space. And I think on some profound level, I suppose, articulated or not, conscious or not, like, I think within my work as an artist with people, there's a deep inclination to create a space which is nourishing. And I mean that in a really expanded sense, I don't mean just that, I'm going to feed people, or we're going to lie down and do some somatic work together, or like if they need to talk about politics, that there's a space for that. If we need to slow down the process because actually things are coming up that we can't ignore, that the work fits the people and the complexity of people's lives, that it meets actual need, and that's a hugely ambitious thing. And I think most of the time it's impossible to do that, because most of the institutional frames within which we work are not designed for us to really meet whole human beings. They're not designed for us to meet people and their histories and what they're struggling with. They're like in, out, parachute in, parachute out. And so I suppose a big part of that for me is trying to listen. What does it mean to listen? What is it, and what is a listening process through the unfolding of a project? How do we hear each other? And how do we try and hear each other, not just to answer the needs of a kind of project, but where are we going together? How do we build these connections that become nourishment, that become a source of connection and enlivenment, a sense of sharing realizations or sharing reflections or understanding. So all of that piece, in a way, reflection and connection and understanding and being witnessed and being heard is really, I think, critical to me around a sense of, I don't know, what we might define as a kind of exchange of energies. Does that make sense? And I suppose to really do that, I always feel it's about meeting the other in myself, the other in the other, and doing that in the most authentic way. And part of that is political. Part of that is, particularly within a social practice art context, part of that is not coming with an agenda. And also avoiding a lot of what I would, I suppose, describe as the extractive processes that go along with engagement, engagement work. Once we're in an extractive process with people, we're trying to get something out of them, we're not listening, we're not focused on what the actual energy in the room is, we're not focused on what the actual needs are, we're not focused on what might nourish, what might nurture, because we've stopped listening because we have our agenda, we need to fulfill it, there needs to be an outcome, etc. And often that doesn't come from us, often that's, I suppose, the kind of the colonial reach of how institutions have come to function, which is they see people as resource, basically, instead of people as source. And if they're source, then our source meets their source, and then we really are open to the realm of what could happen within the space. That's the ideal. I don't know how you, what do you, don't know if that, any of that resonates for you.
Absolutely, yeah. And I really love that shift between people as resource to people as source, because you know, then there's the connection even beyond the individual, you know, and we are connected. We need from people, what are we using people for, you know, all of those ethical relationships that in a sense we can acknowledge or ignore in our relations with people. I think for me, I've worked in community arts for 20 years in education, and I was working within mental health specifically for a few years, and it took me over 2 years probably to realize that what are we doing here? I was running an arts and mental health charity, and I started off and we were just busy, under-resourced, financially. So we're just so busy to just keep going, keep surviving, keep going, funding, do. And everything is stretched. So there's no, this resource of time wasn't there to be able to stop and pause and consider really what is going on here. So after about 2 years, the question came, and when I looked at what we were doing beyond just the service that we were offering, but within the system, within the health system of how that was operating, and what we were all doing is just trying to plug symptoms, mental health symptoms, to help people to manage them. And there was nothing within the system that was looking really at what is going on here. Why are so many people over the years, the statistics have grown, suffering with mental health conditions, such high levels of people with anxiety, depression, who are on medication for anxiety and depression, who are coping and managing and staying in work and doing all of those things, but then living with these health conditions for years, and the whole system is just trying to keep it all going. Like nobody is stopping to look at really what's going on here. And I realized for me, I just couldn't really continue in that role. I wasn't going to be able to change it all myself. I accepted my own limitations in terms of what was possible for me, and changed to be able to do something in another way. So some of my work now speaks to well-being, but from a kind of integral perspective, where the mental aspect of my being is one aspect of my being. Mental health isn't a thing. My mental isn't separate from my physical. They're both intrinsically connected. And for me, that sits much more closely with my own values.
Gosh, there's so much that's resonating there. Several things went through my head, and I suppose it's really, it's impossible to have these conversations without kind of like, we're in late stage capitalism, like the vampiric nature of the use of resource, the use of the consumption of resource, and then the bypassing of actually our the value of our actual source and resource. What is it that people have that is of profound value? That just like working cultures just bypass that. And we're expected, interestingly, I think as artists, often to bypass that, and then you also talked about like well-being, and I mean, like, the well-being industry, of course, also extracts, profit, and extracts, like, even well-being is done in really, I think, commercialized ways. You can look at things like mindfulness and how much it's become co-opted, and I suppose, I think that kind of generally, whatever we call it, the broad scope and landscape of kind of well-being, spiritual practices, a whole bunch of stuff has kind of come into the realm of like, right, what can we do with this? How can we sell it to people? How can we, but I was thinking actually about this idea of it. Yeah, I was reminded of, I've been thinking about this recently. It's been going through my head a lot. How like, I was thinking about within, I suppose, social practice, art, cultural work, where, of course, like, you're not necessarily in a studio, painting, or you're not necessarily, individual artist, making work and generating work for a public, whether it's in a gallery or anywhere else. Your primary context is people. And I was reflecting on that recently. I don't know why it came into my head that often there would be, I think, a lot of subconscious stuff is going on there in terms of how we absorb what we think we ought to be doing within working cultures. So, for example, I know there have been moments within projects, or I'm almost certain this would have happened within like the Bridgend residency project and others, when that moment where like you're starting a new project and really like there's this whole bunch of stuff to do with getting to know people, and meeting people, and there's all kinds of subconscious things that are going on, which is like, oh my gosh, I've got to get through this process of getting to know people to get to the work, inverted commas, and then the thing I became really aware of recently was like this moment, sometimes in like creative practice, within social contexts, within certain communities you're working with, and you might meet someone and you might tell them about what you're doing, and they might be interested, and you start to have a chat with them, and you talk about the project, and they'd be like, oh yeah, I think I wouldn't mind knowing more about this or getting involved in this way. And you'd sort of like the inverted commas, the work bit, the project bit might be over. You might have chatted to them for an hour and a half, and then you might carry on chatting to them, and it's in the realms of just like human exchange, and you're getting to know people. And I think there was always this really subconscious feeling in me of like, oh, hang on, I'm not quite that additional, like, surplus bit. Oh gosh, that's not quite me. I'm not sure if I'm being professional there by like letting that conversation roll on. It's somehow like it's kind of entering the realm of us just getting to know each other for the sake of it, as opposed to having as opposed to being quantifiable or commoditized, or for the project, what can I extract for the project? And it's only recently that I realized like that demarcation between, we're talking about work and how we can, of course, we're doing it in these friendly, getting to know you ways, but then if there's this artificial place where you go, we're no longer talking about the work necessarily, but we're kind of just getting to know each other and really chatting about other stuff. Somehow that demarcation, I think, is where I've deeply internalized capitalism, and I've deeply internalized forms of like patriarchy, and I've deeply internalized systems which basically say your interactions have to be productive, and your interactions with others have to be productive. And the value of simply being with another human being and exchanging energy and exchanging the act, being in the act of unfolding yourself to another human being, hearing that person in their space, hearing something about their history, making connections, connecting with another human being in an authentic way, is not somehow is we're living in cultures which have devalued that. And I've had to really kind of become conscious of, no, that space is the space which has profound value. And institutional spaces, I think, they may not readily admit, but they would want us to demarcate in a way that extracts currency from our work with people. And I feel where we are almost within the realms of the colonial project is where we don't allow for that, where we approach people as currency or resource to be extracted from. And then, so there's this huge kind of, I suppose, need, I think, and radical responsibility and ethical responsibility to be in, to try and maintain and move towards spaces that are not just commoditized, you know. And I think I had to set up Gentle Radical to give myself the almost space to do that, the freedom to do that, because I found myself being so complicit in agendas and kind of cultural agendas which were like parachuting out. What are you getting out of people? When's the project? When's the outcome? Where's the report? Where are the images that demonstrate that, you know, you did stuff with people and this happened and culture had that impact? And I actually think that is just, all of that is so, trying to find words that aren't really over dramatic, but I just, there's something so kind of like, you know, there's something dehumanizing. There's something so othering, and there's something that is like really missing the profound value of what connection is between human beings. And that running around that you talked about, like working within projects around people's health and well-being and mental health, but like actually running around like a crazy person, and like not and of course it was so much of a part of, I think, what this piece is as well, and what this whole dialogue is about, like, when are we not grounded in our own energies and in our own life force and in source, you know, to be of benefit to others. And like, I think there's entire industries, and I would include the cultural sector in that, where we're running around trying to deliver stuff without really coming from our grounded sense of self, you know, which is why a lot of our sector like is powered by people's burnout, basically, which is, it takes, like, it's taken me, I don't know about you, I'm sure I'm hearing it in some of the things you're saying, but like it's taken me like a conscious like and not just once, not just twice, like multiple moments and periods in my life where I've had to consciously dismantle that in my own life and try and find other ways, you know.
Yeah, I definitely, it's the same for me. And for me, what I've kind of discovered in my own journey with that is kind of like really foundational belief that I have, like from really young. In fact, from the somatic practice, it really comes in a womb experience. So early in my cells of, I am responsible for everyone else. That has been my life kind of journey, really. I'm responsible for everyone else. And so, you know, I've definitely gone through my life with my relationships with my family, and then in other partnerships, and certainly in my work, you know, always doing more, needing to do more, needing to be more, needing to help everyone, needing to have the ambition to, you know, fix everything, and then feeling really harsh on myself with self-judgment of when I can't do that and when I don't do that. So that's been a sort of 40-year journey, which, you know, I've kind of moved out of. I say kind of, I really hope I hope it's done. It's done. I could see it. I've done a lot of healing work around it, and I'm like, I'm ready to let that go now, because I just can't do that. I can't be responsible for everyone else. And so then that brings me very much to like, well, what now? You know, if I don't have to do anything for anyone else, what now? And it brings me back to myself, and it brings me back to my own center. And how do I live from here? How do I offer from here? So that's kind of unfolding for me. There are a couple of things in what you spoke about that I'd love to hear a bit more. I would like to come on a little bit more later on to find out what sorts of practices you might have for this reconnection for yourself. But I'd love to hear a bit more about Gentle Radical. So I know you set it up about 5 years ago, and you know, we had a chat maybe about a year ago or a year and a half ago, something like that, about this kind of having this space in a community for the community, and what that provides for people. And I'd love to know about what you've seen really growing out of it over this early period of sort of bedding into the community, in a sense of how that's been for both you personally, you know, as you manage that and set that up, and then also how it's been for the community, and what kinds of experiences they're having, or engagements, the way that they're taking part in that with you.
Yeah, gosh. Well, it has been a journey. I mean, it's hard to talk about the learning that comes out of the last 4+ years. It's hard. There's so much. And yeah, I suppose Gentle Radical was a space that I felt I needed to set up. It kind of began a number of years before I eventually thought, right, let's set this up. But it began within this sense of like, oh, I've got these different selves. Like I've got this creative, like artist, like cultural practice self over here. Then I've got this activist self, but which is never quite comfortable in activism, because it always just feels like there's not enough spirituality in activism for me. And then there's the spiritual, like practice person, but that never feels political enough. And it just felt like, oh, there's just, why are these things separate? These things just feel wrong to be separate, because in my head and in my understanding and my experience, they all need to be connected. You know, I don't want a politics without spirituality, and I don't want artwork without ethics. You know, I don't want I don't want sort of spirituality that's not open and creative and emergent and explorative, you know, and I don't want a dogmatic spirituality, you know. So I think partly it came out of this sense of like, now I would use the language healing justice, you know. So like I'd use those terms. I mean, I'd say in the last 5 or 6 years, even we're dealing with a whole range of like terminologies and fluencies that enable us to talk about that stuff, you know, that we don't believe in it, or some of us don't believe in forms of justice without our own radical renewal. We're not here to martyr ourselves. No one should be martyring themselves. We are all of profound value. We all hold value. How do we uphold the value of every single entity in our enterprise, and together move in emergent ways together, you know, which is not straightforward all the time, you know. Sometimes it's blissful and other times it's deeply challenging, because I don't think you can do that work without looking at yourself and what you bring. And so when you talked about that sense of, like in Buddhism, we would, this word is often misused or misappropriated or misused, but when we talk about karma, you know, which is fundamentally your fundamental tendencies, you know, your patterns, your life patterns, like when you talked about like from like you know, from pre-birth, you know, that sense of I'm here essentially to carry everyone else. You know, I'm here to be responsible for everyone else. Like, I don't think you can do this radical work without facing your own karmic patterns and tendencies, right? Your own attachments, your own misbelief about yourself and what you're here to do, you know, and also your misbelief about the others, you know. And I suppose gentle radical in that sense, you know, we do cultural work, and our interest is to really, I suppose, I would, you know, I'll be honest, for the first kind of three and a half years, it was like, you know, it's not like you set up a company and you know, there's a salary, there's a wage for you to run an organization. So initially, for quite a while, there was like, okay, juggling, you know, freelancing work and the small little bits of money we get to do stuff with Gentle Radical. And it was trying to evolve that. And a lot of the events that I suppose I've been interested in, both with Gentle Radical and pre-Gentle Radical, although I think it came much more into focus in the work of Gentle Radical, was how do we democratize cultural spaces, political spaces, like intercultural spaces. So what I've always been interested in, particularly living in an area like Riverside, which is very diverse and multi-ethnic, multi-faith, intergenerational, you know, we've got 65 languages, you know, just in this tiny little part of Cardiff. What does it mean for culture to really genuinely be accessible in all of the widest and most complex possible ways? You know, so part of that has been about creating platforms, events, activities, cultural spaces, which don't start in contemporary art galleries or don't start at mainstream cultural art centers or spaces. They start right at the grassroots in community spaces, or we work in faith-based spaces, or we work in, you know, community buildings where local people go, you know. And I suppose when you start making the work in and for certain people who actually are often routinely excluded in multiple ways from, you know, whatever we call kind of mainstream, you know, cultural provision, when you make those people, you know, I kind of started using this term or this kind of line a few years ago, making the marginal our mainstream. Like when we decide to work at the marginal spaces, those spaces which are routinely excluded, those communities who are routinely excluded, and you make that the center, and then everything else can just drop in. You know, people who don't experience barriers, you know, to the work will just, I don't need to worry about those people. They will just drop in, you know, they'll see your event on Twitter, they will catch it on Facebook or whatever. What we're trying to do is reach people who might not be on social media, or who speak second language English or no English at all, or who've just arrived in this country experiencing traumas, or just are indigenous white Welsh people in Riverside who actually, you know, are dealing with a deep isolation, you know, or are dealing with poverty, or are dealing with all the multiple barriers that mean that people are simply not experiencing the opportunities, particularly the cultural opportunities that, you know, people take for granted, you know, that we take for granted in the cultural sector. So partly it's like the establishing of, you know, what I would call kind of radical access. And I think radical access has to be like people being given opportunities to know that something is there, it's available, and it can happen on their terms, you know, and that you're removing as many of the barriers as possible to people's inclusion. And then the other bit of radical is the long-term bit. So like, I feel like I don't want to, I mean, part of Gentle Radical is I wanted to stop, you know, parachuting in and out. Not that that was my choice, you know. I remember saying to people after the Bridgend project, like, and I remember thinking to myself, I was here for a year, like so much happened. I would gladly be here for another 5, but like, you know, and I actually remember like really like that sense of like, why leave? What is it that means, you know, we're trying to, the lack of logic to building things that are profound and rich and generative and then dismantling them because funding runs out. That just seems like such a waste of, you know, multiple people and you know, a kind of a waste of that community ecology's energies, you know. And I'm not saying that people can't continue, and they do continue, but I suppose the gentle radical formation has been like, we don't want to waste those energies. And also those energies are precious. What people give us, the stories they share, the connection, how they're showing up to share with us, to have dialogues with us. Like, I don't want that to end, out of respect for people, out of respect for them and the lives that they're sharing with us. And so I suppose the other part of the formation is, how do we work in perpetuity with people? And the only way I know how to do that, the only logical kind of practical way to do that, is to say, well, let's stay in this one community. I've lived in Riverside for 24 years now. Other people live here or around that we work with. And I suppose the shift comes from, if you're around in a place, then you're trying to shift that historical, like, that historical model, basically, of coming in and out.
Mm-hmm.
I suppose I'm interested in what might be the dialogues that last 6 months, 2 years, 10 years, 20 years. Like, what does it mean to work in a way where eventually people you're working with, and the generations of projects that have evolved, you know, like, what does it mean to, like, 30 years from now go, oh, you know, at some point this project, people will bury me in the ground, you know? So when we talk about viable spaces, anti-capitalist spaces, anti-colonial, anti-patriarchal spaces, it means community. It means we actually think about what the village is in which we want to raise our children. And I do not mean as parents, you know, parent or no parent. I'm not a parent, but I want to raise children. I want to be raised, and I want to co-raise the people around me, you know. Part of that is staying in a place, yeah. And enabling that conversation to continue and sustain. And it also probably means, I think, to a certain extent, shutting off other things, you know. It means, in a way, sometimes saying no to invitations that come, which are about being here or being there, or, you know, I'm not saying we don't respond to projects, we do, and invitations, but we did a little interview with someone recently as part of something called Doorstep Revolution, which is one of the projects we're running at the moment, which is having conversations with neighbors, you know, loads and loads of people across Riverside. And one of the people on one of the streets we were knocking doors on said, yeah, can you come and meet me in my allotment? So we did that and spoke to him. We were there for about 2 hours, and I remember saying to my colleague when we left, like, gosh, that was such a great conversation with Derek. He was called Derek, this guy. And I remember saying to my colleague, Tony, like, why would we stop being friends with Derek? Like, you'd want to be friends with Derek. Wouldn't you want to be friends with Derek? I want to be friends with Derek. He said, yeah. And then it was like, why would we stop? Like, why would we want to stop that? Like, if we started to get to know that person became involved in this, you know, whatever the enterprise is, whatever the ecology is, whatever all the different activities and projects, like, you'd want to have these evolving relationships. And then I started thinking about the perpetual growth model of capitalism. And what if we took that perpetual growth model, which is, of course, destroying the planet and has been destroying lives and communities for, you know, 300 plus years. And that's not true. It's done a bunch of things, but at this stage of late capitalism, it's threatening, you know, our survival on this planet. But what if you took that perpetual growth model and you mapped it onto friendship? And what if the perpetual growth of friendship was the requisite currency for your cultural work? and going back to the piece I was talking about a while ago, but like that moment in my head when I was like, oh, I've been chatting to this person for an hour and 20 minutes. I'm now moving into like just friendly chat regardless of the project. Is that valid? What if you validated that? And not only that, you just literally like modeled an expectation that those dialogues, that connectivity, that exchange of energy is the basis of ethical work. And then you just build cultural formations around that. And then we build our understanding of how we co-create. There's a lot of, language around co-creation but like, I think we naturally co-create when we're in permanent dialogue with each other, because people just talk and they come up with ideas. You go, that's amazing. Let's try and, how do we do that together? Yeah.
I'm thinking of my youngest son as I hear you, and I think about young kids playing and this natural inclination to connect and create together, and the energy just flows and builds, and things are made and destroyed, and it moves over here, and there's a real spirit of togetherness always as they play. And recently I was having a chat with Oscar, and he was talking about love, and he has a little bit of a thing where he's moving between his dad's house and my house, and he'll be like, oh, I love dad more, oh, now I love you. Trying to negotiate these transitions for him, where he's trying to love us both really and make us feel loved as he's working out how he feels in the moving, and I say to him, love, the more we love, the more love we have. So we don't ever run out of love. It's not something you can run out of. And the more we open our hearts to have love here, so the more things we love and the more people we love, just the bigger our hearts are and the more love there is. And he's still trying to get his head around this. And he's like, is that really how it works? But it's absolutely my experience is that the more I open to connection with others, the more I am, literally, the more I am. And it brings me to myself in connection with others. And I would love to see that, across organizations where it's not just some companies I've seen have done incredible work, and it's called befriending in terms of the kind of formal things, befriending companies whose role is to connect with often older isolated people, and to perhaps have a conversation with them, or to show up and tell them a story and be the only person, the only human they will see all week, and it's so vital, and the impact that has on an individual, I've heard people say it just changes their lives to have that contact.
Yeah, and I think, and also like, I suppose that conventional model we have, which is a temporary hit, a lot of cultural institutions like, right, oh my God, we need to be seen to be doing this work. I'm not saying they're not, there's not sincerity and genuineness, but so much of it is token, and so much of it is temporary, and so much of it is, we can only do it for this long. And so that person that is having this really needed intimate connection with another individual, like what happens when we extend that model of friendship into a wider community? What if that, and this is not like, obviously we're not talking about anything new here. Our ancestors were doing this, and not long ago, like a few generations, not long ago at all, we had people, communities, neighborhoods where people were looking out for each other's kids. If your parents weren't home, you'd go over to the neighbors and you'd hang out and have dinner with that. It was kind of like this sense of family, extended family or community, neighbors. I suppose we have become so hyper individualized in our culture that we don't even know how to be in groups together any longer. And I actually think this sense of life force, this sense of restoration, you know, like the restorative qualities that we're looking for in order to sustain ourselves. The opposite of the burnout, you know, the opposite of the running around. That restorative space, I actually think we also source it with others, you know, like I'm not sure if I believe in just like, oh, I work really hard and guess what, I then go off on retreat somewhere and like, you know, come back after 11 days. One, who can afford to do that? A lot of people can't, so it's just totally unavailable to most people. Two, there's this sense of like, oh, I've got to escape daily life and its challenges and like the drudgery of it or the whatever. And if you're lucky enough to be doing something, you're like, it's still often, you know, overwhelming. You know, the demands are just quite yeah, no one feels in balance, right? Very few people feel in balance in their life. So this idea of like going off to restore yourself and then coming back, like I know there's value in it, but I don't, like where we need to restore ourselves is in daily life, and therefore create spaces, community spaces, working spaces, cultural, socio-cultural spaces, which are restorative, which have sufficient spaciousness for us to be doing that very profound work of holding each other in spaces of care, spaces of respect, spaces of mutual witnessing, you know. So like I feel like that's when you talked about that person going and sharing something, or with that older person, let's say, member of the community who's like, you know, experiencing probably, yeah, as we know, huge amounts of loneliness in older generations. How does that get extended? How can that become normalized? What community and cultural formations are needed for that person not to just have to rely on that individual, but to start to be able to get to know other people within a neighborhood constellation, you know, or ecology? And then how do we service the needs that we're yearning to have met, you know? Yeah. And I think it's really, and the other thing I've realized, I mean, it sounds like an obvious thing to say, is that, oh my gosh, it's just that work is so slow. And I've had to, like a piece of elastic, like pull out, stretch out the basis of upon which that work is going to happen, because we have to be as well and as healthy and as interconnected and as like restored. You know, we have to find ways of doing our own self-restoration, otherwise we're not going to be around. We won't be able to sustain in a way. And I think that came on the back of just getting, over a 3-year period, you know, basically totally burnt out, you know. And then at one point really feeling like there was a dangerous level of something breaking down in me, you know, and realizing that is not working and that can't work if we're not constantly in this space of restoring energy, restoring well-being, finding where we can some kind of equilibrium. And that means it's got to go slower, because if I'm going to do that work, I haven't got as much time to do the work. Well, I'm kind of hurling myself at where I can be in service, you know.
Yeah.
So the energy to be in service to ourselves and others, I feel like, is a big question. Like working in the cultural sector, we need to be asking ourselves, where is it not just, oh, we're going to be in service to others? Where do we keep coming back to being in service to ourselves? And whilst understanding, actually, the work of justice is urgent, you know. I feel like I'm having to hold constantly, like I've got these pulls in me, like, my gosh, there's so much work to do. There's so much work. The work of justice is vast. And like, I want to, and then the other part of me is like, you're not going to, you need to go easy, because you've got to be in this for long enough. So you need to, yeah. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And I wonder if you have, for anyone who's going to listen, how do you manage that? Because that, I expect, is a kind of inner sort of play battle that lots of people will have, who in the last 12 months, as some of these structures begin to collapse and that kind of changes begin to shake us, in our communities a bit more. It's like there is so much work to be done. And here we are as individuals, maybe already stretched in lives or with families breaking down, whatever that is. How do you manage? Do you have practical things you do? What sort of strategies do you have to be able to just kind of live with that, I suppose?
Well, I feel really boring because I have been doing the same thing since I was 24. So it's over 25 years now, which is I have a Buddhist practice. And pretty much every day, I'm 50 now. So yeah, 24, that's like 26 years going on. I suppose I have a chanting meditative practice. And I suppose that would be that's my point of departure, And I suppose that's what I mean about like, I really believe really passionately in like our, whatever spiritual practices that we have, they should be in our lives. Like there was a really great quote I read from a Buddhist activist, a kind of mentor, I suppose, for me, many years ago when I first started. And this man, Japanese man, he said, enlightenment for enlightenment's sake is absurd. So yeah, I could go off and like spend some time on the side of a hill, focused on myself, kind of like drilling down into myself and, sourcing my whatever, my light, my enlightenment, my wisdom. But like its value is in life. Its value is in the kind of amidst this crap, amidst the structures of violence that human beings have created to oppress others. It's in the inequity, it's in the rat race, it's in all of these models that are not working for human beings, that don't raise up the dignity of life. Like the function of our enlightenment, of our wisdom, is to find ways to steady ourselves so that we can be in service, So for me, if I don't do that, if I don't chant this personally, like if I don't do that practice pretty much daily, I can start to feel, I can't describe it, like I can start to feel source ebbing away from me, like that's not to say I might have lots of energy. I can have lots of energy, yeah, but I'm talking that like the deeper energy, the deeper knowing energy of like intellectually, what do I do this or do we do that? It's like, well, you know what, at a certain point, when we are connected to source through any number of spiritual processes or methodologies or practices, we're bypassing like the thinking brain all the time, and I love the thinking brain. I'm massively in my thinking brain, too much. But actually it's the dropping into, when I chant, I kind of like, it's like it's a bit like, for me, it's like a song, it's like a song of, a song of connection to the universe. It sounds so cheesy, but like, that's the way I feel I can remember myself, steady myself, listen to myself, be witness to myself, and often it kind of bring out and allow that all of those misreadings of self and others, all of those, the trauma that we carry, the pain, the loss, it's about bringing that out and saying, okay, these are your materials, and how are you going to transform that? So I feel yeah, like spiritual practice. And I think chanting for me has been my absolute steadying thing. And over the years, and I've seen, it's like a lens, you know, like the lens through which we can see ourselves is really like incredible. It's incredible to be able to constantly come back to seeing ourselves. Oh yeah, right. Okay, that's happening again, Rabab.
Mm.
That default way of thinking, you're in it again. Or but I think also it's not, it's also about like, that's where I dream.
Mm.
It's where I really dream as well, and about possibilities. That it's where I dream about a world beyond or through toxic systems, you know, war, forms of, you know, systems of violence. You know, it's like where I dream like that we can come out of these, that we can make our way through and out, you know. And I need that. I think when I'm chanting, it's like I'm trying to open my life to the universe, you know, to source, basically. And you know how they say like we have to go to sleep at night in order to actually be like reinvigorated with life force.
Mm.
Like if I lay on a bed still for 7 days just trying to reinvigorate myself, I couldn't do it. I have to go into a different state of consciousness, right?
Mm.
I think that's what happens through prayer for me. What happens through meditative practice, we are conscious but sourcing another depth, you know. So that, yeah. How about you? What are your
Yeah, I think for the last 4 years, I've been practicing authentic movement, and probably in those practices, I've been training with a choreographer and dance therapist called Joan Davis in Ireland, and so when I started it, it is a spiritual practice, and but it's somatic focused as well, and particularly in the way Joan presents it. So it's probably been the most it's not even that it's the most transformative training or practice that I've engaged in, but it's so slow. I have been able to stay completely present, and it's really about developing witness consciousness. That really is the arc of the whole piece. But to arrive there, we start off with mover consciousness, and then we have silent mover, and we have silent witness, and then there's a speaking witness, and then there's the integral witness, and then we arrive at empty witness. And really, like, that's three and a half years of doing that. So now I do move still, and through the movement, I suppose, my learning is how, first of all, maybe the first kind of movement that comes through my body will be my own personal, what's here now, what's here in my identity, maybe what's here in the history, you know, and I learn to track that, and then I stay with the body, and then sometimes there is a moment where what is personal is no longer here, and I come into something which I will call presence. Again, it's really tangible, and so there's always a witness. And in one of my last practices with Joan, it was just the two of us, and we both knew the exact moment where this shifted. So it is tangible in the energy change, where I move from Tracy moving to body moving in space in absolute union with my environment, you know. And I experience, I suppose, a kind of oneness, and those mystical states that, you know, it might be described as that, but that I am both deeply in myself, you know, I'm not leaving my body, I am in my body, but through my body I am also more than my body. And I perceive that as a kind of state of being or something. So, coming into joy or love, and feeling my whole being is suffused with this. And when I hear you describing the song to the universe, I also feel this state in myself, and I feel the vibration of it. There's a frequency almost of it that I could use song or prayer. Those words really resonate in this experience for me too.
Yeah, yeah, that sense of I think frequencies is a word, isn't it, that really helps us understand that. Like, we are resonating.
Yeah.
And actually our energies are resonating in multiple ways. And like, how do we get into frequencies of resonating, which are life-giving, in which we're thriving, in which we're flourishing, in which we are enabling of others without depleting ourselves? It's funny when you were speaking, I mean, it was so beautiful to hear, those moments. And you're right, we know it when we're in those moments with others. And I think that happens with both other humans and the non-human as well. Like, you can feel it with animals. I know I've had those experiences with animals. And then I always remember this amazing experience. I mean, I say it's amazing. I feel like it's also like, it's a regular experience. I don't want to say I'm having it all the time, but like, we say it's amazing because we're so dislocated and so disconnected to this living, like, universe we're in, this living, breathing ecosystem, which is vast. And anyway, I was on many years ago, this was like, I can't remember now, probably 20 years ago, I was doing at our Buddhist center in the south of England, the Buddhism I practice. Anyway, I was there. You could go to the center, and I don't think you can do this anymore, but you could go at the time to the center and like volunteer for a week. They only do like 1 day volunteering now, but at the time you could volunteer for a week, and it was quite intense. You were with 7 other people. And you can imagine, like, you're taking care of the center and you're chanting like 3-4 hours a day. So like, shit is bound to come up in you and in the others. And actually part of that amazing week is that, in a way, the invitation is to really face the stuff that comes up, that the others are a mirror for you, and anyway, that in itself was beautiful. But I happened to have a really bad back when I went. It was quite painful. I thought it might get better. It got worse. And by the 3rd day, it was just so painful. I thought, I'm going to probably have to leave. And our Buddhist center is in these beautiful grounds. And I thought, well, I was in my break on the 3rd day, contemplating whether I should go. And I thought, I'm just going to go outside and just have a bit of a walk. And I did that. And I found this tree. I can't even remember. It was a smallish tree. I can't even remember what kind of tree. And I just thought, I just need to sit and kind of like sit I leaned my back up against this tree, okay? And like, I really like nuzzled right into it. Like, when you just kind of push your back I sort of pushed my back into this trunk of this tree. And I just kind of, all I could do, I was in so much pain, is I just breathed into myself. And I felt like my trunk and this tree's trunk were just like fused. I was like, okay, I'll just breathe in. I'll breathe in. I don't even think I was consciously going, I'm going to breathe in the energy of this tree. I just was like desperate for this pain to go away. Anyway, after about 20 minutes, it sounds crazy to say this. After about 20 minutes, all of my pain had disappeared. And this is gonna sound, anyway, I don't want to sound like a sort of new agey kind of wacko, all respect to the new agers out there, but like, I just knew where that pain relief had come from. Like, I felt like that tree had just absorbed all of that pain just into itself, the way trees do. they're absorbing our carbon monoxide, they're absorbing all our pollution all the time. And I remember I felt so moved. And also I felt so like, what the hell? How did that happen? You know, what, like I was so, I don't know, like it deepened my faith whilst like leaving me amazed. Does that make sense? And I remember saying internally to myself, I love you. I said, I love you to this tree. And instantly, like I didn't even have a split second to think, the message came back, which is, yeah, we love all of you. Oh. We love all of you. And I can't know whether a tree was speaking to me. It doesn't matter. Like, I felt like that point of communion was what being in the rhythm of source is. And the fact that I find it so surprising and almost shocking is how disconnected we are from source. Like, I think that is what's happening in this living, breathing cosmos that we're part of all the time. And we have grown up in systems from which that have disconnected to us to that so much that it's almost like we're incredulous that we can have those experiences. But I think that is the true norm of our identity and of our being and of how energy is functioning, and we're a part of that energy. We're part of that exchange. And I still think to this day, every time I cycle in a city and I'm in a city and I cycle past trees, I am in like internally bowing in reverence to these living entities that are growing out of the concrete in the ground and are still supporting my life. So yeah, it's like the invitation is just always to go deeper, isn't it?
Thank you.
Thank you, Tracy. I've got a smile on my face.
Can you feel it? 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 Can